Well, I've had a couple of days off while we're getting things ready for Christmas. I'm just going back over it to lower the face. So I'm up to that point there, and I'm working my way across, because as I get back here, there's a bit of an ool. It's 3/10 deeper than the contact face, so it should be a pass, or maybe two passes. But as this is the one we're going to be using, I want to make sure that it's good. So yeah, scratch. Just thought I'd take a couple of minutes to go over my understanding of this style of scraping and how you change the surface. Now, this is not anything I've picked up out of a book or anything that I've picked up off anybody on YouTube or the Practical Machinist or anything like that. So in answer to Mr. King's comments and criticisms on my previous video, this is my own theory, my own understanding, and it's come out of spending the last couple of 100 hours scraping straight edges. There's two basic styles of crescent that you're going to form. There's the broad brush one, and then there's the narrow one. Each produces a distinctive surface texture. Obviously the broader one has it for the same depth of scrape. You're shifting material from a broader section, so you produce the same depth, but it's with a wider trough. Whereas the narrower one, you're effectively producing the same depth, but with a narrower scrape. The only time that really makes any difference is when you're working on a time frame. If you want to reduce the surface, or if you want to go over and scrape an entire surface, and you stick with that crescent, it is going to take you a long time to do it, because even though you might be able to scrape deeper, you've got to put a hell of a lot more scrape marks in to shift material. So I would say that narrow profile is really for breaking up a surface. It's putting the final refinement on, but I'll come to that in a minute. I've tried to explain it a bit better with another diagram. So if you do a series of scrapes individually, you get a series of holes, or if we do a cross section through the middle of those, you get a low points intersecting a series of the original surface. The same thing applies with the broader scrape. You get the original surface, the scrape out, original surface, scrape out. Well, that's the same whether you do a straight scrape or the half mooning in terms of that cross section. The only difference between the two when you're actually scraping, as far as I can determine, is the length of the scrape. So whilst that's the cross section profile, if you like, through there, that one, for all intents and purposes, is a similar one. It's a scoop. So the deepest point is going to be there. It's going to be shallower at the ends and going down. So if we just take it on that basis, if you overlap them so that the crescents are pretty much there, you're going to get a hole, slight rise, back into the hole, slight rise, back into a hole. So you're going to actually produce a surface which is, if that's the original one, let's say that's not been scraped, you've actually dropped that level then. You've still left a series of troughs, but you've dropped the level by whatever depth you can scrape it out to with each push. Whereas if you're doing that, you're breaking the surface up, so you've got to go back over it then to effectively produce that. That's a hell of a lot more. Now, when I've been in discussion with Chris, my pal that was trained in Manchester, a firm called Craven's, he was saying that some of the older scraper hands there, and in particular the guys that trained him as an apprentice in the 60s, the depth of these scrapes would be anything over 1 thou, and you could hear the guys going at it from the other side of the shop, which from what he describes was about 100 yards long, with the physical effort of actually taking out the material. Chris has in his day was, I suspect, quite a well-built bloke. He's not so tall, but he's I would put him 15, 16 stone when he was in his 30s and 40s. In his 20s, he said he hadn't got the weight, but he got far more energy. So he was keeping up with the older hands. And they all seem to be built forearms, shoulders, and not a lot on the legs. And an awful lot of them were very keen amateur boxers, which says something for, you know, bearing in mind this was in the days before the sort of training regimes that the boxers use these days. So that's my understanding of how you're lowering the surface versus breaking it up. Now, you still have to cross your strokes. So if I'm doing a series of strokes like this down, I've then got to come back and go that way. If you don't, you end up with basically a series of ridges running across in your predominant hand. And the one thing I can tell you from my experience of doing this curling, for me, it's handed. I can keep a relatively consistent depth and stroke length working from my left to my right, but going from my right to my left, it's all over the shop. And that has to be down to practice. The alternative is that I have to have the straight edge positioned in such a way that I can actually work it from both sides, crossing over to the other side. So I have to keep a mental note on which direction I'm going, and then what I try and do is, where I'm looking to build up a sort of consistent surface, I'll work left to right. Where I'm breaking up the surface, I'll predominantly go right to left, because the stroking is less regular. You're picking them out. That's enough of me blathering. I'll get back to scratching me straight edge. Well, it's been about a week and a half since I've been out here. You can probably tell by my voice I've had a bit of a cold, or dose of man flu as we call it. I am going to clean all this print off, which was the last one I did, and I was of the view it's probably good enough. I'm going to clean it off and reprint just to get an idea, see whether anything's moved. I don't think it should do, but I know when I printed that, I made, apart from the side to side and the backwards and forwards, I actually moved it quite a bit to pick up a good ink. So I'm going to do I'm going to re-ink the master and do a fresh print, see how it looks. Bring it back when we're done. As you can tell, it's a bit, the scraping position's a bit close to the printing position, so I've having to be very mindful about debris that I'm scraping off. So when I'm scraping that direction, sweeping that direction, and the straight edge is covered by its wooden shoe. The next bit is when I tip it over, it's done over there. And then the last bit is just to make sure that I've not actually left any mets. It's white spirits, mineral spirits. When I put it on the face to clean the face off, sometimes you get a dribble runs around the sides. That's sucking down well. That's about there. That's about there, so it's hinging okay. I'm just looking at the negative print on here to make sure there's nothing untoward. Then that gets covered back up. I'll bring you down and show you the print. There's a few larger holes like that one, but yeah, put it into context. Possibly a little bit light in that area at the back. It's really not easy getting a good video of the coverage just because of the lighting and the reflection. I'm going to get into glare. But that's fairly consistent all the way down. I'm getting to a stage where I'm thinking I'm happy to run with that. Just turn off this backlight, see if it makes not a great deal of difference. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to scratch my head and decide whether I want to redo it. That was a bit butt clenching. That's 3/16 wide and 5/8 deep, over 3 inches. That's the first time I've took a narrow, deep slot. I've been making up the clamping knuckles for the sled that will slide the DTI along the bed of the lathe. I've always struggled making up these clamps. I've always found that either I drilled too much clearance or it's a white knuckle job tightening them up. A chap by the name of Forrest Addy suggested drill the hole under size, put your fixing in, give it a quarter turn and then ream the hole, and that's it, done. No white knuckles. Beautiful. Thanks, Forrest. Just to verify where I was at, I've reset it up this end because I didn't remember bumping this block up to the V.
This is measuring the far side of the inverted V for the tailstock. And it'll be a bit rattly and whatnot. So this is under the headstock casting, so it's the original machined and then ground surface.